The wind didn't howl that winter. It shrieked like it had lost its mind, tearing across the mesa and slamming snow against Etta Cole's lonely cabin like fists demanding entry. There were blizzards that came and went, like travelers with no real aim. But this one had settled in, staking a claim on the land, the sky, and the skin of any fool who dared step outside. Etta had known winters before. She was raised in frost and prairie silence, but none like this. The world wasn't just cold. It was hungry. She moved like a ghost through the cramped cabin, wrapping her raw fingers around a bundle of dried pine and stuffing it into the black-bellied stove. The iron hissed and clanged in response, like it resented the offering. Still it took. A curl of smoke, a flicker of heat. It wasn't enough to warm her bones, but it would do. The past wasn't welcome here, not allowed. But it lived in the walls, in the book still stacked in the corner, the hand-sewn quilt over the table, the worn carving of a boy's initials on the far leg of the stool. Etta didn't look too long at any of them, not when the storm outside offered a simpler thing to hate. Her breath fogged the window as she leaned against it, staring out into a world reduced to white. No birds, no brush of deer legs, not even the distant crack of a tree limb surrendering under the weight of ice. Just blankness, endless and unfeeling. She'd made it through worse winters. That was what she told herself. When the sickness came for her son and left her burying him behind the shed under a wooden cross she carved by hand, she'd made it through. When the town stopped knocking, stopped waving, stopped even looking her way, she stayed. Because leaving meant forgetting him, and forgetting was the only sin she had left to fear. Another log into the stove, another ration of salted venison cut too thin to fill anything. She chewed slowly, staring into the low flames when something shifted. Not in the cabin. Outside. It was subtle, a muffled thud, too soft to be a branch, too deliberate to be falling snow. She rose, slow and cautious, reaching for the old rifle leaning against the wall by the door. Her boots, still damp from the last storm run, protested as she shoved her feet inside. She pulled her coat over her shoulders, a man's coat, her late husband's, still with the scent of old leather and horses, and braced herself. The door opened with resistance, and the cold struck like a slap. Wind roared around her, stealing breath and thought. She moved anyway. She kept the barrel low but ready, eyes narrowed to slits. Snow cut across her cheeks like sandpaper. The world was white and rage, and for a moment she felt as though she were walking into the maw of something ancient. Then she saw it. Just past the edge of her corral, slumped against the fence, was a shape. A man. Or what was left of one. Etta approached slowly. Rifle steady despite the sting in her knuckles. The man was frozen stiff, his coat, once brown, now stiff with ice, stuck to the wood. His head lolled forward, one glove missing, hand bare and red against the snow. But then, his lips moved. Not words. Not quite. Just breath. "Damn it," Etta muttered, lowering the rifle. "You picked the wrong night to die, mister." She didn't ask questions. She didn't drag out decisions. She crouched, hooked his arm over her shoulder, and with a grunt, pulled him to his feet. He groaned, ugly and low, but didn't resist. His weight was more dead than alive, and she had to plant her boots like stakes to keep from slipping as she staggered back toward the cabin. The door slammed behind her with a wet crack. She dropped him near the stove, kicking it open to let the heat bloom wider. The man groaned again, a cracked sound like a tree splitting in half. Etta peeled off his coat and found his shirt stuck to his chest with blood and sweat. "Don't die on me now," she said, yanking the scarf from his throat and the gloves from his hands. His face was gaunt, wind-bitten, one eye crusted with frost. A gash split his brow, frozen blood smeared like war paint. Only a fool rode into a storm like this. Or a man running from something worse. "Idiot," she muttered, rummaging through the cabinet for the bottle of whiskey and the cloth strips she used for everything from wounds to fire wicks. He flinched as she dabbed the cut, his eyelid fluttering but not opening. "No sense waking now," she whispered. "You'll wish you hadn't." She worked quickly, cleaned the wound, checked for breaks. No gut shot, no stink of death. That was something. Then she saw it, pinned to the inside of his coat, beneath the lining. A cavalry badge, bent, dulled, but unmistakable. Her stomach turned. "Of course," she said flatly. "Why drag in a farmer or a tinker when I can haul one of Uncle Sam's bloody dogs across my threshold? But still." She stitched him up, wrapped him in the extra quilt, pushed the chair closer to the fire so the warmth would reach his cracked lips. He moaned in his sleep, said something about fire, and tracks, and justice. Etta sat back, arms crossed tight, watching him as if he might turn into something else under the quilt. The storm howled louder. She didn't light the lamp, only fed the fire, rationing oil like it was coin. By midnight, he hadn't stirred. She took the boy's old book from the shelf. The spine was soft from use. The pages still held the faint smudge of sticky fingers, long since gone. She hadn't read it in months, maybe longer, but silence presses too hard when it has nothing to press against. She read aloud. Her voice caught at first, then smoothed like a river over stone. And though the valley was deep and wide, she crossed it barefoot, carrying only the stone that remembered her name. His eyes opened halfway through the sentence, glazed, fevered, but awake. She stopped reading. "You're safe," she said, not softly, but firmly. His brow furrowed. "Where?" "My cabin. You were dying. I dragged you in." He tried to sit, but she put a hand on his chest. "You'll tear something. Just breathe." His eyes darted around the room, settling on the fire, the rifle her face. "Name's Jonas," he rasped. She didn't reply. "You saved me. I dragged you inside and kept you from freezing," she said. "Don't confuse that with sainthood." A faint smile cracked through the grime on his lips. "Suits me fine." She studied him. Fever talk, maybe. But his voice wasn't threatening. Not yet. "You got family?" she asked. His smile faded. "No." She didn't believe him, but she didn't press. "You'll stay here until the storm breaks," she said. "After that, you go. And you don't tell anyone what you saw here." He nodded slowly. "I owe you that much. You owe me nothing. I don't want favors. I want quiet." Outside, the wind shifted. She listened. Not quite gone, just catching its breath. The storm had teeth, and now it had a witness. By dawn, she was up, slicing dried roots into stew and checking the window slits. Snow still fell, but lighter now. It was the kind of silence that felt more dangerous than noise. She opened the door a crack, scanned the horizon. White, gray, empty. Then she saw it. Far off, near the eastern ridge, a rider. Small, dark, moving fast. Too fast for the terrain. Her gut clenched. Someone had seen her. Either the man slumped on her fence the night before, or the woman dragging him inside. Didn't matter. In Mesa dusk, truth wasn't half as useful as gossip. She locked the door behind her. Jonas was sitting up by noon, cradling a bowl of broth, hands shaking, but eyes sharp. "You expectin' trouble?" he asked, voice still rough. "Always." He smirked, but it didn't last. "You trust people?" he asked. "No." He nodded. "That makes two of us." She pulled a chair across from him. "Why were you out there?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "Orders gone bad. People got shot who shouldn't have. I walked away." She narrowed her eyes. "You deserted." He didn't deny it. Not the kind of uniform I wanted to die in. She said nothing, just stared into the fire. The flames caught on the brass of the badge, still lying on the table. After a long while, she spoke again. I lost my boy last winter. Fever took him in 3 days. He looked down. He was 10. He loved this book. She pointed to the one she'd read aloud. Jonas nodded, respectful. You can stay till the storm clears, she said. Then you go, and you don't tell anyone what you saw. I won't. The wind pressed against the cabin walls, softer now, like a hand, not a fist. But Etta knew better. The snow might stop falling, but the real storm was on its way. The storm's still here, she whispered, staring out the window. But now it has a face. By dawn, the wind had quieted, but gossip, like fire under dry pine, had already begun its crawl down the hills and into town. The silence that followed a storm could fool even the wary. It gave the illusion of calm, of mercy, of something earned. But Etta Cole knew better. The snow was thinner now, yes, but under it pulsed something worse than cold. It was the hum of eyes watching from windows, of voices curdling behind lace curtains. That peculiar blend of piety and poison that thrived in a place like Mesa Dusk. It had been nearly a year since Etta rode into town without a reason painted on her face. The last time she had done so, she was burying her boy. The town had stood at a distance, hats low, glances lower. There were no casseroles, no condolences that didn't taste like shame. The preacher had muttered something about God's will. Mrs. Kane had offered a handkerchief with one hand and whispered punishment to the woman beside her with the other. Etta had left with her back straight and her heart hollowed. And yet, here she was again, reins clutched in red-knuckled hands, boots stiff with frost, coat stitched at the seams. Her old mare, Dusty, had more sense than to rush. The trail into Mesa Dusk was uneven, still slushy in places, but that wasn't why Etta's jaw was tight. It was the feeling of something unseen crawling ahead of her, of the words that had already beaten her to the dry well and the hitching post. She needed salt and tobacco, maybe coffee, if old Cobble hadn't tripled the price again. But mostly, she needed to be seen. She'd never been one to scurry in shadows. The main road was half cleared, ruts dug by earlier wagons. The bell above the church tower was silent, its rope wound high and frozen. Most shops were open, sort of. Doors cracked just enough to let out warmth and gather news. A boy with a sack of flour paused mid-step to watch her pass. 2 women on the steps of the dressmaker's shop clutched their shawls tighter, eyes flicking toward her and then away, as if looking too long might stain them. The sheriff stood outside his office, cup of coffee steaming in the brittle air. Asa Harknell was a bear of a man, wrapped in a wool coat that looked like it had fought in the war and lost. He raised his cup in a half-hearted gesture. Etta, he said. Sheriff, he tilted his head. Storm spit a body on your porch, or are the rumors true? She dismounted with the stiffness of someone who hadn't done it in weeks. He was half dead on my fence. I pulled him in. Didn't check his pedigree. I don't doubt it. He looked down into his cup. Still, you know how folks get. People were always going to talk, she said, adjusting her scarf. Now they've got something juicy. Could have said something, he offered. Asked for help. I don't need help. I need them to mind their own business. He didn't argue, just sipped his coffee and watched her go. The general store smelled of dust, lemon oil, and suspicion. Cobble was behind the counter, polishing an empty jar that hadn't held anything since last harvest. He glanced up, nodded, then immediately found something more interesting on the shelf behind him. A child peeked through the curtain at the back, blinked, and vanished. Etta moved through the store with slow purpose, collecting what she needed. She didn't hurry. That would have smelled like guilt. The salt she took in a thick brown sack. The tobacco was dry, near crumbling, but she took it anyway. The coffee was gone. When she reached the counter, Cobble rang it up without meeting her eyes. "That all? Unless you got decency back there." He didn't smile. Outside, the street felt narrower than before. She saw them near the church steps, Reverend Greevy, Mrs. Kane, and 3 others who didn't have enough misery at home to mind. They were pretending to talk, but their heads turned in sync when she stepped onto the boardwalk. The preacher's expression was pinched, sunken under his white collar. Mrs. Kane wore a bonnet the color of grave dirt and a scowl to match. The church bell didn't ring, but the town had already called its sermon. Etta didn't bother with the tavern, though part of her wanted the warmth and the whiskey. She mounted up again, the mare snorting at the sharp air. As she rode past the church, the Reverend nodded at her, a motion that held no blessing. She said nothing, but her silence was louder than any hymn. By the time she returned to the cabin, the light had shifted. The snow still fell, soft and lazy now, but the wind had returned to muttering around the edges. The kind of muttering that sounded like names. Jonas was upright when she entered. The quilt was pushed off his lap, and he was carving into the wooden arm of the chair with a broken nail. Not deep, just surface scratches. Shapes, maybe letters. She didn't ask. "You went into town," he said without looking up. "Needed salt. Bring anything else back?" Whispers, glares, same as always. He nodded like that was expected. "You should have let me die. Too late now." He looked up then. "You always this quiet?" "Only when I know what's coming." Jonas shifted, wincing. That woman who looked at me like I'd risen from a coffin, she would have preferred it. Her name's Mrs. Kane. She leads the prayer circle and the rumor mill. Got a hand in everything but her own damn soul. Sounds familiar. Etta moved to the stove, refueled it, stirred the pot hanging over the flame. The smell of broth and root vegetables filled the cabin. She didn't speak. Neither did he. Later, while she mended a hole in her coat, Jonas spoke again. "You want to know what I did?" "No." He paused. "You deserve to know. I deserve quiet." She didn't lift her eyes from the needle and thread, but her hands trembled once, and she cursed under her breath. "Don't tell me unless you have to," she said finally. "Not out of guilt, not to ease your heart. I don't care about your reasons. Not yet." He nodded slowly. "Fair." The knock came at first light. It wasn't a knock, exactly. It was the sound of righteousness wrapped in wool and knuckles that had never chopped wood. Etta's hand went to the rifle. "Stay there," she said to Jonas, grabbing the weapon and moving to the door. She opened it just enough to see them. Sheriff Harknell, Reverend Greevy, Mrs. Kane, and 3 others, men with tight jaws and tighter collars. "Morning," the sheriff said. His eyes weren't hostile, just tired. "Is it?" "There's been a meeting," Greevy said, fingering his hat. "Folks are concerned. I'm sure they are. You've always been a woman of pride, Etta," he continued. "Strong. But pride can lead a soul astray." She arched a brow. "You come to quote scripture, or start a sermon on my porch." "This situation, this man," Mrs. Kane cut in, her voice sharp. "You must see how it looks, how it reflects on your soul, your character." "I dragged a dying man in from the snow," Etta replied, voice even. "Next time, I'll let God sort him early." "You're alone," the preacher pressed. "No chaperone. He stayed in your home for days. The town is scandalized. The town should shovel its own walk before it critiques mine." Harknell raised a hand, trying to ease the tension. "This doesn't have to be ugly, but folks want closure. They want propriety." "Say what you mean," Etta snapped. Greevy looked down. "Marry the man. Make it right." There was a pause. Then she laughed. It wasn't a kind sound. "You're serious?" Mrs. Kane's lips thinned. You'll be cast out, refused service, refused worship, marked as immoral. And marrying a stranger cures all that? We already spoke with him, Greavy said gently. He's agreeable. Etta blinked. You what? He said he'd stand by the decision, if you agreed. Her blood ran hot and sharp. Without another word, she stepped back into the cabin. Jonas was still on the cot, watching. You agreed, she said, low and dangerous. I didn't want to cause more trouble. You are the trouble. I'm trying to fix it. By agreeing to own me like cattle? He stood slowly. That's not what I meant. No, it never is. They gave me a choice. Marry you or get handed to bounty men for desertion. I figured. Staying meant I could protect you. I don't need protecting. He met her eyes. Maybe I do. She froze. That silenced her more than anything else could have. Outside, the porch creaked. I'll do it, Etta said, loud enough for them to hear. There was a pause, then Harknell's voice. Name your terms. I wear my own dress. It's done here. No church, no town hall. If they want a performance, they can stand in the cold. Fair enough, he said. They left. The porch was quiet again, but inside, something colder had settled than any snow. Etta stood by the mirror, her mother's wedding dress over her frame. The lace was yellowed, the hem frayed. She stared at herself and didn't recognize the face staring back. Jonas stood behind her, borrowed coat too big across the shoulders. His hair was still damp from a wash. You sure? He asked. No, she said, but if they want a show, I'll give them one. They stepped into the snow. The crowd was small but loud in spirit. Reverend Greavy cleared his throat. Jonas stepped beside her. The ceremony was short. Nods, a prayer, a declaration. Jonas didn't try to kiss her. He knew better. She turned and walked back inside before the echoes of Amen had faded. Don't mistake this for surrender, she said, as she fastened the last button. This is just another storm I plan to outlive. It wasn't the cold that woke her. It was the sound of hooves where no hoofbeats should be. Etta Cole had always slept like someone prepared to run. One hand near the rifle, one ear to the wind, boots never far from reach. But marriage, if you could call what the Reverend muttered over them a marriage, had rearranged the pieces inside her cabin. Not just the furniture, but the air. Now there was breathing where there hadn't been. A second cup by the basin, a second coat drying by the stove. It didn't comfort her. It unsettled. She hadn't spoken much to Jonah since the ceremony, not from malice, from necessity. The words weren't ready, and she wasn't the sort to speak out of obligation. If he'd noticed her silence, he hadn't said a thing about it. That was, in its own way, a kindness. She'd risen before sunup, splitting kindling behind the shed, steam rising from the basin where she washed her hands. The wind had fallen off again, but that made her more nervous, not less. A quiet wind on the mesa meant the land was listening. That's when she heard them. Not the wind, not wolves, hoofbeats, measured, confident, not a courier, not the sheriff. She wiped sweat from her brow, grabbed the rifle from the woodpile, and stepped into the clearing. 3 men sat on horses a dozen yards from her cabin. Their coats were dust-worn, their horses winded. One man leaned forward slightly in the saddle, reins loose in hand. The other 2 sat back like they were waiting for a reason to move. The one in the middle had a scar that curled from the edge of his left temple to his mouth, like someone had tried to carve the smirk off him and missed. His coat was black. His gloves were clean. His eyes were bored. "Morning, ma'am," he said, voice low and smooth. "Fine place you got here." She said nothing, just stepped forward until the rifle in her hands was no longer a suggestion, but a statement. The scarred man raised a hand, not quite laughing. "Easy now. We're just looking for someone. Rode this direction maybe 4 days ago. Goes by the name Jonas Wexler. You seen him?" Etta's eyes didn't flinch. "Plenty of men passed through. Storm came up sudden. Anyone out there's buried under a dozen feet by now." The man tilted his head, bird-like. "That a no. That's a no." Behind her, the cabin door creaked. Jonas stood in the doorway, unshaven, shirt wrinkled, hand hovering near his hip. The other 2 men shifted slightly in their saddles. The scarred man smiled. "Well now," he said. "Ain't that convenient?" Etta took a step sideways, blocking the line of sight with her body. "You boys got names?" The man's smile deepened. "We do. But they're the kind best left out of polite company. Let's just say we're here on a matter of unfinished business. Mr. Wexler and some decisions he made." Her finger moved closer to the trigger. "He's not going anywhere." The smile faded a little. "That so?" "That's so." Jonas moved past her then, gently resting a hand on the barrel of her rifle, just enough to push it down. "Etta," he said quietly, "let me talk to them." "Like hell." "I mean it." She stared at him. His voice was steady. No fear, but no swagger either. He stepped out, hands empty. "You got what you came to say," Jonas said. "Say it, but you don't touch her. You don't step past that fence." The scarred man leaned forward. "Ain't interested in her. This is between you and the law. You know what happens to deserters." Jonas nodded. "I do." "You left a colonel with a hole in his throat and 2 witnesses dead." Jonas's jaw tightened. "That colonel ordered his men to burn a village, said they were hiding outlaws." "There were no outlaws, just farmers, and one old woman who tried to give me bread." The man nodded slowly. "You know what they call that in uniform?" "Disobedience." "No," the man said. "Treason." He pointed a gloved hand. "Court-martial's too kind. They sent us to collect you, dead or alive." Etta stepped forward again. "Try it." The man looked at her, amused. "You sure about that?" She didn't blink. "Try it and see." Something passed between them then, an unspoken dare, sharp as broken glass. The man chuckled once. "Ain't today, sweetheart. We'll let you 2 newlyweds enjoy your cabin for another night. But we'll be back. With more." He turned his horse with a lazy pull, and the others followed. The snow kicked up behind them as they rode off toward the ridge. Etta didn't lower the rifle until they were specks on the horizon. Inside, Jonas poured water into a tin cup with trembling hands. He sat at the edge of the table, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on nothing. "You should have told me," she said. He didn't look up. "I figured I wouldn't make it through the storm." "You didn't." He smiled without humor. "Fair." "I don't like being blindsided." "I know." She sat across from him, watching his face. There was no panic there. No shame either. Just wait. "You think they'll really come back?" "Yeah. Not just those 3. They'll bring others." Etta leaned back. "Then we prepare." He blinked. "You mean run?" "I mean dig in." He studied her for a moment. "You'd fight for me? After all this?" "I didn't marry you to save face," she said. "But now that they've made it real, I'll be damned if I let someone take my husband off my land in a pine box." He exhaled, like he'd been holding that breath since the day he deserted. Etta stood and began pulling things down from the wall. Traps, wire, scraps of old barn wood. Jonas watched her move. "Let's make the welcome real unfriendly." They spent the rest of the day without much talk. Their silence wasn't avoidance. It was labor. Etta reinforced the windows, nailing boards across the inside at angles that still allowed her to aim through. Jonas limped around the property, dragging lengths of barbed wire into the brush near the corral. They buried broken bottles beneath snowbanks near the front porch and strung cowbells on a line that would sing at the first sign of movement. The light faded quickly, swallowed by dusk, and the cold returned with it. They built a small fire inside and sat on either side of it, arms speckled with dirt and ash, shirts damp with sweat. Jonas passed her a bottle of rye. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. She didn't answer at first. "Because I've buried too many good men," she said at last, "and because I'm tired of people thinking a woman out here can't make her own choices." He nodded slowly. "And me? What choice are you making?" She turned her eyes to the fire. "I don't hate you." He didn't smile. Just let the words settle between them like dust. Outside, the wind shifted again, but it wasn't cold anymore, just still. Too still. They both heard it, the faint jangle of a saddle, a click of hooves on frozen ground. Etta stood, rifle already in hand. A figure on horseback crested the far ridge, silhouetted against the silver sky. Jonas leaned forward. "Too early." Etta didn't answer. She stepped onto the porch, rifle raised. The figure paused at the crest, then turned back toward the hills. A scout. Jonas stepped up behind her. "They're watching." She didn't lower the rifle. "They're planning." She turned to him, voice low. "We've got one night." Jonas held up a rusted lantern. "What do we burn first?" Etta stared at the dry brush by the fence line. "Whatever makes the loudest fire." The quiet before a gunfight doesn't hum. It holds its breath like a church full of mourners. It was the kind of stillness that didn't belong to morning or night. It wasn't natural. It was deliberate. Like the world itself had crouched low, waiting. Even the animals sensed it. There were no deer tracks near the edge of the grove, no hawks overhead, no foxes brushing past the back fence. Etta Cole had seen this kind of silence before, right before her husband was thrown from a horse that had sensed a cougar in the ravine. Right before the fever took her son, and the doctor said, "He's resting easy now," in that too quiet tone. This quiet had teeth. Inside the cabin, Jonas Vexler finished tying off the last of the tripwires by the entry plank. His face was pale, but not weak. His arm was still wrapped in bandages from where he took the bullet last fight, but he moved like a man who'd found purpose again. He was no longer running. He was standing, and it made him taller somehow. Etta watched him from the window, her breath forming small, soft ghosts on the glass. She didn't speak. They hadn't spoken much all morning. There was nothing left to say. Only things to do. The traps were laid. The oil had been poured. The back exit sealed. The rifles were loaded. A dry wind rolled over the plain, kicking up a whisper of snow from the earth. Then came the sound, distant but unmistakable. Hoofbeats. 8, maybe more. Riding slow, deliberate, letting the sound carry ahead of them like a war drum. Etta's heart didn't race. It hardened. She stepped onto the roof, rifle across her chest, scarf tied around her neck to break the wind. From her perch, she could see the trail twisting up from the southern ridge. The snow there had melted in patches, exposing brown earth like open wounds. And riding through that scar were the men who meant to finish what the first 3 had started. Jonas was crouched below, just inside the front room, pistol resting on the window ledge. He didn't look up at her, but she knew he felt her there. The lead rider was easy to spot. Black coat, clean gloves, that scar still cutting his face like a question never answered. Behind him rode 6 others, wide-brimmed hats pulled low, rifles across saddles, mouths tight. Hired guns. Not cavalry, not law. Men who didn't need reasons, only gold. They slowed at the edge of the property. The scarred man raised a hand. The others fanned out behind him. Etta adjusted her sight. He called out. His voice carried on the wind. "You sure about this, Jonas? Gonna die for your pride." Jonas didn't flinch. He stepped into view at the broken front door, pistol steady. "I'm not dying for pride." He took a breath. "I'm killing for my freedom." The man laughed. Loud, genuine. Then he lowered his hand, and the shooting began. Etta dropped the first one. Center mass. The sound of her rifle cracked across the ridge like the start of a storm. Jonas fired from below, catching another in the gut. The men scattered, diving behind trees, brush, anything that offered cover. Bullets tore through the window near Jonas. Wood splintered and snapped. Etta rolled across the rooftop, reloading fast, breath harsh against the scarf. Her heart didn't pound. It pulsed with each trigger squeeze. A gunman broke from the cover of a tree, trying to flank left. Etta tracked him through the iron sight, timed the step, and dropped him mid-stride. He tumbled into the snow like a puppet with its strings cut. Jonas shouted something. Etta didn't catch it. A round slammed into the beam beside her head. She ducked low, waited, rose again. The porch shook. Another rider charging full speed. Jonas stepped outside, caught him at 10 feet, and fired. The man crumpled, horse shrieking and rearing as blood painted its flank. Then came the snap. A gunshot from the tree line. Jonas dropped to his knees. Etta's vision narrowed. She slid down the edge of the roof, landing in the snow with a thud. Her boots slipped, but she caught herself, rifle in hand, and bolted for the side door. Jonas was crawling, left hand clutching his upper arm, blood seeping through his shirt. He was trying to reload with fingers shaking from pain. "I'm fine," he grunted through his teeth. "Liar," she snapped, grabbing his shoulder and dragging him behind the overturned table. A bullet slammed into the wall above them. "We can't stay inside," he gasped. "They'll burn it." "They won't get the chance." She sprinted to the mantel, grabbed the lantern, the one they'd filled with extra oil the night before, and hurled it out the side window. It shattered against the ground where they'd poured kerosene in a wide semicircle. Flames erupted with a roar. The fire spread fast, orange tongues licking at the brush and fencing, creating a wall of smoke and heat between the cabin and the tree line. Jonas coughed, peering over the edge. "They'll try to flank. Let 'em try." 2 riders did exactly that, circling wide through the back. Etta grabbed Jonas's revolver and sprinted through the cabin, bursting out the rear door. The first rider saw her too late. She shot him through the throat, the force knocking him clean off the saddle. The second raised his rifle. Jonas, bleeding but upright, fired from behind the rain barrel and caught the man in the chest. He slumped forward, twitching once, then stilled. Silence fell. Only the hiss of blood in snow, the pop of burning oil, the groaning of a dying horse somewhere near the shed. Etta stepped through the yard, checking bodies, one by one. No survivors, no mercy. She reached the scarred man last. He was slumped near the corral fence, blood bubbling at his lips, the scar looking somehow smaller in death. As she raised the rifle, he coughed and looked up at her. "You were right," he wheezed, almost laughing. "She's a real storm." Etta didn't answer. His eyes glassed over a second later. By sunset, the fire had died. Ash coated the snow like gray lace. The cabin was still standing, barely. One window gone, the porch half charred, but it was theirs. Inside, Etta bound Jonas's arm with strips torn from her apron. Her hands moved fast, efficient, the way a woman worked when she couldn't afford to feel. "You should rest," she said. "So should you." "I will." They leaned against the wall, shoulder to shoulder, breathing heavy, the room full of gunpowder and quiet. Jonas broke the silence. "I never meant to bring this to your door. I know. I just wanted to vanish. You didn't." He looked at her, eyes tired, honest. "You think I belong here now?" Etta didn't answer right away. Then she nodded. "You stayed when you could have run. That's enough." Jonas looked at the cracked ceiling, then at her. "I'll take it." They didn't speak after that. They just listened to the wind brushing through the trees, the sound of a world still turning. "They're planning," he nodded. "Then we finish planning first." By morning, The cabin stood blackened at the edges, but it was still standing, and so were they. The land outside looked like it had taken a breath, but hadn't quite exhaled. Smoke lingered low over the snow, thin and stubborn as regret. Charred brush curled in on itself like burned fingers. The air smelled of oil, blood, and old wood. The kind of smell that didn't leave easily. The kind of smell that made memories stick. Inside, the fire had long gone to coals, and Etta Cole crouched near the stove, fitting fresh kindling into place with careful hands. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, her apron stained deep red and brown, not all of it blood, but enough to mark what they'd lived through. Jonas Vexler sat at the table, face drawn, body tense. His arm was bound again, tighter now, the cloth clean. He wasn't shaking anymore, but he wasn't still either. His boot tapped lightly against the floorboards, the rhythm broken and uneven. Neither of them had said much since the last shot fell. The silence between them was different now, thick but not sharp, like two people walking through smoke, too tired to speak, too alive to fall. Etta poured him coffee, bitter, weak, but hot. He nodded his thanks without looking up. She didn't sit, just leaned against the wall near the stove, arms crossed, watching him like one might watch a pot that never quite boils. "You ever gonna tell me the rest of it?" she asked at last. Jonas looked up. His eyes were older than his face. "You sure you want to know?" "I wouldn't ask if I didn't." He took a slow sip, then set the cup down and stared at his own hands for a long time. "It was in Arkansas," he began. "Small farm valley near the Redwater Trail. We were told it was harboring outlaws. Union scouts had gone missing. Colonel Leathers gave the order to burn it." Etta didn't interrupt. There were no guns there, no riders, just farmers, women, kids. I told him that. He told me orders didn't ask for opinions. When I refused, he knocked me down in front of the company. Said if I didn't follow the order, I'd be next. Jonas's hands clenched slightly. He sent 2 men to drag me out back. I broke one's nose and shot the other in the leg. Then I walked back into camp and put a bullet in Leather's throat. Silence. I didn't shoot the witnesses. That's a lie. But someone did. Maybe panic. Maybe revenge. Doesn't matter. They pinned it all on me. Said I cracked. Deserted. Left a colonel dead and 2 good men buried. Made me the story they needed. Etta's voice was flat. And the village? He looked at her. I walked away before they could torch it. I don't know if they finished the job, but if I'd stayed, I'd be dead. Or worse, one of them. Etta didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there as the wind outside shifted, brushing snow across the cabin walls like a warning. Jonas looked down at the table, his voice a rasp. I don't expect forgiveness. She walked over, picked up the map he'd been scratching into the wood with the tip of a knife. It was crude. Lines for fences, dots for cover, X's for traps. You're not asking for forgiveness, she said. You're telling the truth. That's rare. He blinked once, then nodded. She tossed a coil of rope onto the table. We'll need to reset the perimeter. Jonas pushed back his chair. With one arm. Then move your legs faster. They stepped outside together. The sky had turned the pale silver of early afternoon. Clouds stretched thin and high. Wind stirred again. Not strong, but enough to carry scent. Enough for dogs or men to follow. They worked in silence, reinforcing trenches near the barn, resetting tripwires along the back, digging deeper post holes for spikes. Jonas limped, favoring his leg from the previous wound, but he didn't complain. Not once. Etta hauled buckets of black powder jars from beneath the floorboards of the shed, old remnants from her husband's trapping days. They weren't meant for people, but they'd serve. Around mid-afternoon, the sun broke weakly through the cloud cover. Etta stood on the roof again, scanning the distant trail. Nothing. But that didn't mean safety. It meant planning. She climbed down and found Jonas sitting on the porch step, panting. "You think they'll come again?" she asked. "They will." "You think they'll come bigger?" "Not bounty men this time," Jonas said. "Real soldiers. Men in blue. With orders. With numbers." She didn't answer, just looked toward the horizon. "That doesn't scare you?" he asked. "Everything scares me," she said. "But I've been scared before. It passes." He leaned back, wincing. "How do you do that?" She glanced at him. "Do what?" "Keep standing like nothing can touch you." She sat down beside him. "Because I've already been touched. Lost a husband to a fall. Lost a boy to fever. Lost friends to lies. And after all that, I'm still here. So whatever comes next, let it come." They sat there a long while. When the shadows stretched and the snow crust hardened, they moved inside again. Dinner was dry venison and canned peaches, coffee reboiled from the morning pot. Jonas watched her as she ate, face unreadable. "You know," he said, "I thought about running again, that first night." She didn't look up. "But I didn't." She swallowed. "Why?" "I looked at you, and I knew I'd never find another place like this, a place worth bleeding for." The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was full of something unspoken. Later that night, Jonas took the floor with his blanket. Etta sat by the stove, stitching holes into new cloth she'd cut from old curtains. Neither of them needed music. The fire cracked its own rhythm. A knock didn't come, but a sound did. A distant, slow groan of wheels over gravel. Jonas moved first, up to the window. Etta followed. Dust rose on the trail, early, before the sun had finished warming the frost. She counted. 3 riders, then 5, then wagons, then flags, blue and gold. Jonas turned, face grim. Companies arrived. Etta didn't ask how many. She didn't need the number. The sound was loud enough. Jonas reached for her hand across the table. She let him take it, and outside, the dust on the horizon began to rise again. The cavalry didn't come at dawn. They came at first light, like a funeral procession that didn't bring the preacher. The early sun broke over Dust Vale Divide in weak strokes, dragging long, sorrowful shadows across the blood-stained snow. Ice still clung to the barn's eaves and the fence rails, brittle and shining. Etta Cole stood on the front porch with her rifle across her chest, watching the dust grow thicker on the southern trail. The cabin behind her was dark, fortified, full of silence and old gun smoke. Jonas stood at her side, his legs stiff, his wounded arm bound tight. He wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He was something else now, solid, grounded, tethered to the place he once thought he'd flee. They had spent the night like soldiers, quiet, precise, deliberate. The land around them was no longer just home. It was a living defense. Traps had been set deeper in the frost-hardened ground. Black powder buried under fence posts. The barn rigged with kindling and a tripwire. It was not elegant work, but it was theirs, and it would speak for them if their voices fell short. The sound of hooves was different this time. It didn't come in bursts. It came as a steady, thunderous wave, the kind of sound made by command, the kind of sound men followed without thinking. Etta squinted into the rising sun and saw them. Cavalry blue, brass buttons, leather reins. Wagons behind them heavy with gear and men. A flag fluttered, a golden eagle on blue, and beside it rode a man she recognized before she knew his name. Straight-backed, tall, gloves still on, Major Ira Kittredge. He dismounted with the stiffness of someone who had never lived a hard day in a saddle. His boots hit the ground like declarations. He didn't remove his gloves. "Mrs. Cole," he called out. She didn't move. "I am Major Ira Kittredge. I'm here to collect." Her voice cut through the cold. "You're late." The major's lips barely twitched. "We're here on authority of the United States Army. We're seeking a fugitive. Goes by the name of Jonas Wexler. We understand he is currently residing within your home." Etta spat into the snow. "He's right here." Jonas stepped forward, shoulders square, gaze unwavering. Kittredge raised a brow. "That simplifies things." "Does it?" Etta asked. The major's voice stayed even. "This is a matter of military justice. He is wanted for desertion, murder of a superior officer, and treason." "Then take it to a court," Etta said. "Not to my doorstep with rifles and threats." Kittredge glanced around. His soldiers had begun to spread, boots crunching over snow, rifles rising subtly from shoulders. The sound was a cold warning. Jonas stepped closer. "I deserted," he said. "I admit it. I shot Colonel Leathers because he gave the order to massacre innocent civilians. I refused, and he tried to have me killed. I fought back. Then I ran." The major didn't blink. "The law isn't always just, Wexler. Sometimes it's just necessary." Etta's voice sharpened. "I've had enough of necessary men." Kittredge took a step forward. "This doesn't have to be bloodshed." Etta raised her rifle. "Then turn around." The major signaled with a gloved hand. Soldiers fanned out, forming a crescent around the cabin. Jonas's jaw tightened. Etta's breath came slow and calm. He turned to her. "Don't." She didn't look at him. "No more running." A single shot cracked the air, not from the soldiers, from Etta's rifle. The bullet struck the ground inches from the major's boots. He didn't flinch, but he didn't smile either. "Last chance," he said. "No," Etta replied. "This is it." Everything erupted. Gunfire tore through the quiet like lightning through canvas. Etta dropped behind the stacked woodpile as bullets splintered through the porch railing. Jonas ducked into the side doorway, firing through the narrow slit they'd carved in the wood the night before. A soldier went down by the well, snow turning red under his coat. The barn doors blew outward with a roar. One of the traps ignited, sending shrapnel and flame across the right flank. Horses screamed and reared. Men shouted and fell. Etta moved fast, her rifle always moving, always aimed. She wasn't guessing, she was selecting. Jonas took a bullet through the leg, but didn't fall. He crawled to the overturned trough, braced himself, and kept firing. His hand shook, but his aim didn't. One soldier made it to the porch. Etta met him with the butt of her rifle, cracked his jaw, then fired once more into his chest as he staggered back. Smoke thickened. It swirled in every breath, choking the light, turning the air into ash and fire. Another blast shook the ground, the black powder charges they'd buried near the fence line. 2 more soldiers down. Then the shouting stopped. Only the wind remained. Etta stepped through the clearing, boots heavy in slush and soot. The major lay near a broken wagon wheel, a wound in his thigh bleeding freely. A young soldier tried to haul him up. "You should have walked away," she said. Kittredge looked at her, wild-eyed. You're insane." She didn't reply, just watched him as they staggered to the wagon and rode off, what remained of them anyway. No one fired a last shot. No one dared. When the last wagon disappeared over the ridge, Etta lowered her rifle. Her hands trembled only slightly. Behind her, Jonas limped forward, blood soaking his pant leg. She caught him before he fell. "Thought you said you didn't need protecting," he muttered. "I don't." He smiled faintly. "You saved me anyway." Back inside, the cabin reeked of powder and scorched wool. The walls bore new holes. The table was chipped and blood-smeared, but the fire was lit. The coals deep and red. Etta stitched Jonas's leg herself. Steady hands. Tight knots. She worked in silence, and he didn't flinch. When it was done, she leaned back in her chair. The firelight danced across the bullet holes in the wall, but neither of them looked at the damage anymore. You know they'll send more, Jonas said quietly. I know. He looked at her, brow furrowed. How are you going to keep fighting? She didn't answer right away, just stared at the fire. I'm not fighting for you anymore, she said. He blinked. What? I'm fighting for us. The words hit him like a hammer, not loud, but final, solid. He exhaled slowly, like a man who'd been waiting to breathe. You really mean that? She nodded. He reached for her hand. This time, she didn't stop him. Outside, the wind had gone gentle again, brushing through the trees with a tired sigh. They sat side by side, broken but breathing, wrapped in a silence that no longer felt empty. Later, after Jonas slept, Edda stood in the doorway. The stars were high above the ridge, quiet and sharp. Smoke curled from the chimney behind her, the only flag she'd ever need. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. Her storm had passed, and she'd weathered it, not because she was alone, but because someone had finally chosen to stand with her. And so it lingers, like smoke in the rafters, like hoofprints hardened in snow just before the thaw, like the hush that falls over the high desert when the wind runs out of things to say. The tale of Edda Cole and Jonas Vexler doesn't drift away easy, not like so many others swallowed by the silence of Dust Vale Divide. It clings to the land like burnt cedar and blood on frost, a memory that doesn't ask for permission to stay. Somewhere out there, past the charred fence line and the buried powder jars, a frayed wedding dress still hangs over the back of a wooden chair, yellowed and stubborn as the woman who wore it. Somewhere in that cabin, the chair Jonas carved still bears the scratchings of a name no army could erase, and the fire still burns low in the belly of the iron stove, its heat quiet but unyielding. The quilt folded at the foot of the cot once wrapped around a fevered stranger. Now it smells of cedar, smoke, and two people who stood together when it would have been easier to run. And maybe that's what stays with you the longest, not the sound of gunfire or the weight of the badge she left on the windowsill, but the stillness that followed it, the kind of stillness that says something right happened here, even if no one else saw it. There's something about the wind now, too, softer, like it's humming a different song, not a morning tune, not anymore, but something that carries both ache and answer. It whispers through the gaps in the wood, past the barbed wire and the broken beams, telling anyone who's listening that the story didn't end in fire. It was forged in it. There's a gravestone behind the shed that carries no name, just a single word: loved. And beside it, the wildflowers bloom every spring without fail, even when the frost says they shouldn't. The townsfolk don't speak of her much now, but they step a little softer past the ridge, and the new preacher never questions why the old church bell stays silent. Some say they still see a woman riding the perimeter come evening, coat flapping, rifle slung low, not because she's afraid, but because the land remembers, and so does she. There's an old coffee tin tucked behind the stove full of bullets that were never fired, and letters never sent. Sometimes truth doesn't need to be shouted, doesn't need a crowd, doesn't even need to be believed. It just needs one soul stubborn enough to keep it alive. And if you listen closely, just as twilight settles and the earth turns silver, you might hear the soft creak of a porch step, the clink of a tin cup, the whisper of a name carried by someone who refused to forget. Maybe that's what honor really is, not the medals pinned to uniforms, but the choices made when no one's watching. Justice may come late, but it still matters. And sometimes, a forgotten woman can save a generation of kindness just by choosing not to give up. Not on truth, not on herself, not on the stranger she dragged from death and dared to stand beside. So if this story lit something in you, if it stirred an old ache or reminded you of a time when right didn't need applause, then leave behind some sign you were here. Light a candle. Write a letter no one will ever read. or just whisper her name once into the dusk. And if your heart still beats for the quiet kind, the stormwalkers, the ones who bend but never break, then you're one of us. Like an old book opened by oil lamp light, this story ends not with a bang, but with breath. A breath that says the fire still burns. Subscribe to our channel to keep hearing stories like this one. Stories that don't need noise to be heard. Stories that remember what the world forgets. Stories that carry honor not like a flag, but like a scar.